Okay, test, 1, 2, 1, 2. Here we go. Good afternoon. It's November 10th, 2020. Welcome to another edition of the Big East Report from BlueNotes2.com. Taking a look at the current goings on with the Big East as it stands today. Last week or so, the Big East had their media day, and we talked briefly about that during the last episode of Big East Report, and just threw it up here again. The preseason coaches poll: Villanova, Creighton, Providence, Connecticut, Seton Hall, Marquette in order. Bottom half: Xavier, Butler, St. John's, DePaul, and Georgetown. Since then, not much has been going on other than the fact that we've got the AP poll, came out. And the preseason poll came out yesterday, Monday, the 9th of November. AP Top 25. Not many surprises other than the fact that a bunch of Big Ten teams are in the top 10. Iowa, who finished last season at 25, but they have everybody back and legitimate All-American. Wisconsin, it's somewhat of a surprise. Illinois, which is everybody's darling this year, also made the top 10 of all things. You got 5 Big 12 teams in the top 10. You've got 4 Big East, Big 10 teams in the top 10, and 7 Big 10 teams in the top 25, including a lot of teams that were not ranked at the end of last year. So the Big 10 has 7, the Big 12 has 5, the Big the ACC has 3 in the top 25. The Big East has 2, just 2. Villanova at 3 and Creighton at 11, which I'm surprised that Providence didn't make the top 25 because they've got a lot of people returning. We've got a big class coming in that's a fairly well received class. And they've got, I believe, at least 2 transfers who've been granted immediate eligibility that are going to be difference makers in the Big East this year and nationally. Anyway, the AP poll: Gonzaga, Baylor, Nova, Virginia, Iowa, Kansas, Wisconsin, Illinois, Duke at 9, Kentucky 10, Creighton 11, Tennessee 12. 13 is Michigan State, 14 Texas Tech, 15 West Virginia, a potential Creighton opponent, 16 North Carolina, 17 Houston, Arizona State, Texas, Oregon at 20, the only Pac-12 team in the top 25. Houston and Gonzaga, the other 2 outliers. Houston from the AAC at 17. I believe Gonzaga is number 2. Gonzaga number 1 in the AP poll. Okay, so from the West Coast Conference. 21 is Florida State, UCLA, Ohio State, Rutgers, and Michigan round out the top 25. And the others receiving votes is a bunch, including Providence at I believe, 34. Connecticut at 41. Seton Hall at 43. Now, suffice to say that Seton Hall is bringing practically everybody back except for the shooter, bringing everybody back, including Mamu and Samuels and Miles Kale. Everybody back but Miles Powell. And they've brought in a great class, and they picked up a couple of good transfers, especially the Harvard kid, the point guard from Harvard, Aiken. I really, in many polls, they were third in the Big East, and oftentimes flipping with Providence. Some polls had Providence third, some had Seton Hall third, and I'm really surprised that either Providence or Seton Hall didn't make the cut for the top 25. But, we're talking the AP poll, preseason poll. So they've been wrong before. There's a lot of bias by the various and assorted writers. So while disappointing, it's not surprising. Big East last week put out their schedule. Starts December 11th through, and they ran it out through the 23rd of December. There'll be no games over the Christmas holidays. So between November 25th and December 23rd, that month, you got to get your games in. And the way things are going, COVID's over 100,000 cases a day, 1,000 deaths a day. States are enacting various and assorted rules and legislation to make it difficult. So for those who are planning on playing in an MTE, multi-team event, in November and December, many of those plans are getting dashed because the states are not putting out a uniform set of rules. Each state's putting out different rules. So for example, the Bad Boy Moors crossover classic at the Sanford Pentagon in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. There were 8 teams. Duke left to form their own MTE at home. Dayton came in. Utah left because of coronavirus concerns. So they brought in South Dakota State. So now, because South Dakota currently has a high rate of infection, of course, that went down last night and others went up. It's in a constant state of flux. So today, South Dakota is bad news. Tomorrow, Ohio's bad news. Or today, South Dakota's bad news. Tomorrow, Kansas is bad news. So there's no rhyme or reason because the impact the pandemic is having is in flux but growing everywhere. So Ohio put in different, more stringent set of rules. Kansas put in a more stringent set of rules that if you're coming from a state that has X amount of COVID infection, you're going to have to go automatic quarantine for 14 days. At least Ohio was 14 days. I don't know what Kansas said. But that's greater than what the CDC recommendations are. But no one's following the CDC recommendations. Every state is initiating their own based on their public health and their political situation at the time. So, for example, Ohio State and Dayton are in the Sanford Pentagon Bad Boy Moors crossover classic. They both withdrew because they would have to go on a 14-day quarantine isolation after they returned, whether they had COVID or not. So that's 2 weeks after the 2-day event on November 25th through the 27th. They come back home the 28th. That means through the 8th of December, they can't play. November 28th through the 8th of December. Well, actually, through the 12th of December, if it's 14 days. 10 days would be through the 8th. 14 days would be through the 12th of December that they can't play. Well, they have other games scheduled during that span, but they wouldn't be able to play them because of the state regulation. So needless to say, they withdrew from the 2-day event to be able to save, I don't know, and it cost them 3 games and 3 days there to save 3 or 4 games later on. Almost nobody is playing with fans, so they're going to be most likely playing in smaller venues. But the states have to get their act together. There needs to be a comprehensive set of regulations or recommendations that everyone follows, not 50 different models for 50 different states. If this maintains at the current level, with all these states with their varying rules and whatnot, there aren't going to be any MTEs. Aren't going to be any bubbles. What you're going to find is teams playing catch as catch can, scheduling 2 or 3 games where they can at home or in that state. Now, if you're in California, Florida, Texas, or Ohio, where you have a lot of teams, then that's not a problem. If you're in Utah, Wyoming, Missouri, Nebraska, Iowa, where you only have a handful of Division I teams, that becomes an issue. Kansas, that becomes an issue because, Iowa could play Iowa State and both could play Northern Iowa and Drake. So they could get 3 games in, but in Kansas and KU are in the same conference. So they're going to be playing each other anyway, but they can't play each other in a non-conference. That only leaves both of them playing Wichita State and, God forbid, UMKC up in Kansas City. So they're both going to get 2 games. Now, Wichita could get 3, UMKC could get 3, but Kansas and KU are only going to get 2 games out of that deal if they have to restrict themselves to playing in state. So it's a problem. It's a big problem. States are going to have to get their act together and come together with some sort of unified plan or reducing any isolation to 10 days rather than right now it runs anywhere from 10 to 21 depending on what states you're talking about. So they need to get it down to 10-day isolation, provided that you've had a positive test. If you've had no positive test, you've been in a bubble in South Dakota, they have medical protocols in place, or you've been in a bubble at Mohegan Sun in Connecticut, they have preventive measures and testing and all that in place, and you play your 3 games, you don't have a positive test and you come home, you test when you arrive back home. If it's still negative, there shouldn't be an isolation period, a mandatory isolation period. The team should be able to go on. Now, if you run into a positive test at the MTE or upon your arrival back home in your home state, you get a positive test, by all means. Do the 10-day isolation and test. And then at the end of 10 days, if you've got a negative test or 2 negative tests, whatever they want, then you can go back to business as usual. But there's got to be a cohesive plan. There's got to be a uniform plan that everybody's going to abide by. Blah, 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 blah. Big East news. Big East bubble plans intensify as of the 6th, according to Rothstein. The goal looks like to play 5 or 6 games in a 2-week January bubble. There's no mention of the December slate, just a January bubble. So most likely is the Mohegan Sun in Connecticut if you're talking a legitimate bubble. Of course, there's others. There's South Dakota, there's Indy, there's Las Vegas, there's others. But for the Big East, the Mohegan Sun is the most likely because of the proximity. It's right there in Connecticut. Dayton is drawn, as I mentioned earlier, withdrawn from the crossover. Ohio State withdrew because both face a 14-day in Ohio, 14-day quarantine upon return, regardless of whether they're positive or not. As we were talking, individual rules throwing everything into chaos, it's a real cluster group. And you've got to get some kind of consensus plan that everybody can operate on so that there's consistency and evenness across the board. Otherwise, it's chaos, and it's going to throw everything out of whack. There's not going to be any games because of this overriding fear on the parts of many states. And we may wind up doing a bubble, come home for 2 or 3 weeks, do another bubble, come home for 2 or 3 weeks, and another bubble, and so on and so forth in January through March, which is the worst case scenario. But that may wind up being the case, given the sheer weight of the numbers of the different scenarios that each state is proposing. Okay, some of the watch lists: Karl Malone, power forward list, Seton Hall, Mamukashvili, and JRE and at Nova are on that list. The Dr. J small forward list, Jermaine Samuels is on that list. Paul Scruggs, Justin Moore, Book Knight, and Mitch Ballack are on the Jerry West Award watch list. And Gillespie and Zagorowski are on the Bob Cousy Award watch list. KenPom came out the other day. All the BE teams are in the top 86 of the KenPom. That's great. 5 of them are in the top 50, so it means at least 5 are probably going to make the dance. No team sits worse than 86. Nova led the pack, of course, at number 4. Creighton at 13, Marquette 34. Marquette is on no one's radar, except there's a couple of radar. Obviously, they're on the KenPom radar and they're on Gitmo's radar, but that's about it. UConn, Seton Hall at 50. Those are the teams that are most likely, based on KenPom, to make the dance. Nova Jays, GE Warriors, the Huskies, and the Pirates. Butler, Providence, Xavier, St. John's, and then finally DePaul and Georgetown round things out. Of note, according to KenPom, the conference total adjusted EM plus rating of 15.8 is 4th in the country. Start things off, trailing the Big 12, the Big 10, and the ACC, ahead of the SEC and the Pac-12. There again, the SEC had 3 teams in the AP preseason poll, the Big East 2. If we're that good of a conference, we should have had at least 3, probably 4 teams in the AP preseason poll, taking 1 or 2 of those 7 away from the Big 12, and maybe 1, if not 2 from the Big 12, 1 or 2 from the Big East, 2 from the Big 10, who had 7. Take 2 away from them, or 1 from them and 1 from the SEC, since we are the number 4 conference ahead of the SEC in the Pac-12. But that's, as I said before, it's we're talking AP writer poll bias, so it's the way it is. Some of our teams will obviously, most likely, Providence, UConn, and Seton Hall will move up as the season progresses, given the opportunity to play and get some games under their belt. If there's only 12, 13, 15 games played, then this starting out with 2 ranked teams will become an albatross, and we won't get a 3rd and 4th team in because of the lack of games played and the lack of significant wins and all that. And it'll be beating up on each other to try and squeeze, everybody beating up on Nova and Creighton, trying to squeeze in a third-ranked team late in the year out of Big East play. More news. Crosswell from Providence to forward is immediately eligible. Providence getting stronger. The 2021 class is also getting stronger. Crosswell 6'8", 245, 10 points, 8 rebounds last year. He's a transfer, and he's immediately eligible. Going to be a big deal for the Providence front court and adding significant a significant player to the mix, and he's probably going to wind up starting. He's a big boy. He's a bad boy. Makes Providence a much tougher team to deal with. And had this been the case back in August, then they would have gotten more consideration from me than they did back then. Creighton, both the Eurofrosh are out with torn ACLs this week. Modestus Canclaris, Radi Andro, and Dronikashvili, both are out with ACLs within days of one another. Creighton's been snake bit with injuries over the last 5 or 6 years. My God, I mean, one after another. But at least these guys are just incoming freshmen. Neither were expected to see significant time this year, but they would have probably, especially Canclaris at 6'9", 220, power forward, would have seen spot minutes at the 4 while they're learning the system. And Dronikashvili was expected also to see spot minutes, probably playing both the 1 and the 2. St. John's head coach Mike Anderson talks about double standards for black coaches. The link is here. UConn is under isolation after one COVID case, and I believe I have more on that later. Seton Hall, Pirates have gained new additions in Aiken, blah, 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 but also Takal Molson is now eligible, along with freshman Jahari Long, Dominguez Stevens, and Jeff Nangu. Ngandu. Ngandu's from Canada, and he's not on campus. So they're working to try to get a visa, but he's not expected to play a major role, but hopefully they'll get him on campus sometime here in the not so distant future. Missouri transfer Trey Jackson is sitting out this year. Okay, Xavier, waiting on a waiver for forward Ben Stanley. Looks like it's going to happen. They're also planning, I'm surprised they haven't done it already, they're planning to submit a waiver for Adam Kunkel next week. That's shocking. You would think that they would have done that months ago, but nonetheless, supposedly they're going to submit a waiver for Kunkel next week. They had a scrimmage, and supposedly the Creighton offense looked pretty good for Xavier. Run and shoot looked good. Steele was sending out accolades for the increased movement and spacing and shooting and this, that, and the other by the Muskies. So that should be fun. I think they come to Creighton first. Let me go back up here and see. Muskies at Providence, at DePaul, at Providence, Seton Hall at Centus, then the Muskies at DePaul, Marquette at the Centus. Xavier at Creighton, yeah. The Muskies at Creighton on December 23rd. So technically, the Xavier Providence game should be a good indicator of what's going on. All these Xavier games are actually pretty good because they're playing the front runners. They're playing at Providence. Seton Hall comes to the Centus. Marquette, I'm big on Marquette. Marquette comes to the Centus, and then Xavier at the Chico playing the Jays. That's a telling run to open up the season. That may be the toughest opening run of the conference, and it's going to tell the story for the Muskies. If they can mess around and go undefeated or 3-1, that's going to be something, especially since they open at Providence, and then they have Seton Hall at Centus. Those first two games are going to be a killer. Then they get a Marquette team that I'm high on, that I think is going to be right in the mix, and then they get the Jays. That Xavier may have the toughest schedule of anybody in the Big East coming out the gate. Okay. Old X, the X-Men, huh? Yeah. UConn had a player test positive, as I said before. That was on November 7th. They ceased activities 14 days, so they're out of action till the 21st of November. 2 games, Central Connecticut and Hartford are in that span. Well, shortly thereafter, November 25th and November 27th. So what the prognosis is yeah, you're out for 10 days, or in this case 14 days. Then it takes you a week to get your shit together. Well, those games are in that week, so UConn may cancel or bump back those games to give themselves a chance to get back in some semblance of game shape. That is yet to be decided, but that's most likely what's going to happen. In Central Connecticut and Hartford will get bumped back. Probably not canceled since they're in state, but they'll get bumped back. And they'll try and sneak them in on a catch-can basis, I guess. The UConn's also in the Legends Classic, December 1 through 3, so that shouldn't be affected. No fans. BE, no fans. Creighton, UConn, DePaul, Georgetown, Marquette, all staying no fans start the season per Rothstein and other sources. Also, was just put out yesterday that Duke is not going to have any fans, but I'll cover that in the NCAA report. Also, in other news, not only Duke not having any fans for the season, but Izzo at Michigan State tested positive yesterday, November 9th, for COVID. He'll isolate for 10 days and back on the 19th. So the biggest thing is that we've got this disparity, state to state to state, in isolation. 10 days, 14 days, 21 days, blah, blah, blah. And that's got to be resolved if we're going to have a season. If that's not resolved, the chances of the season going successfully, bubble or no bubble, is in jeopardy. Because if I go to Mohegan Sun and test and play and come out of there unscathed and hopefully with a trophy, then I come back to Ohio or whatever state I'm going to, and they say, oh yeah, you got to quarantine for 10 days, or you got to quarantine for 14 days, you got to quarantine for 21 days, even though you've been testing and testing negative, and then come back, and when you come back, you test negative, but you still got to isolate. That's going to make things impossible, and that's got to be modified, changed, so that if you're in a bubble and you tested negative throughout that duration, you come home, you test negative, you should be able to waive the ISO. Now, if you come back and you get a positive test, then yeah, okay, ISO. You got to live with it. But if you come back home from the event, you've been tested all along, you've been negative, you come home, you test negative upon arrival back at home, then you should get a waiver for this isolation, regardless of where you've been, because you've been in bubbles, you've been tested continually, and you come back and you test negative. That should be sufficient for meeting a safety guideline. Now, and maybe you do more than just an initial test upon arrival back. Maybe you do an initial test upon arrival back, and 2 days or 3 days later you do a second test just to make sure. And that's cool because you're not isolating. You don't have to isolate. Now, if you get a negative test upon arrival or a negative test the third day back, second day back, third day back, whatever it is, then you go in isolation. Okay. Well, anyway, so that's pretty much it for this edition, the 10 November edition of the Big East Report. Thanks for watching. Click the like, subscribe down below, donate via PayPal, Cash App, or Patreon to help sustain this channel and the blog. Big Blue Notes Basketball 365 YouTube channel and the blog bluenotes2.com. Thanks a lot. This is Gitmo signing out. Take care. God bless. Wear your mask. Social distance. Wash your hands. And now that the new Pfizer vaccine is supposedly 90% effective, when that's finally available, take the damn shot. You know what I mean? Take the damn shot. The shot, Pfizer's shot, and whoever else comes out with one that's gonna, if it's also effective, if we get a couple of different varieties of the shot that's effective, then we can cut this thing down maybe in time to have an NCAA tournament in March. Who knows? But 90% efficiency is effectiveness and efficacy is outstanding. Supposedly it's safe. So God bless Pfizer. Take care of yourself. God bless, and we'll see you later. Okay, ciao.